Yeah, let's begin with the focusing on zooming in on the role of agriculture and the role it plays in climate change. So we can see the global contribution of food sector emissions in this pie chart created by the IPCC. Um, I think it's quite a well-known fact and not many people disagreeing over this, that about two-thirds livestock causes about two-thirds of the food sector's emissions, and it takes up nearly 80% of global agricultural land, yet only produces 20% of the world's supply of calories. So what we need to remember is that poorer countries' livestock on marginal lands where crops cannot be grown are actually an important part of people's livelihoods. I know it's very contentious, this conversation around how much meat we eat. So again, going back to context, it's really important to speak about the issues in context. And they also offer a source of nutrients that might otherwise be hard to find. In agroecological systems, livestock can also be integrated into the system of to fertilize our soil. However, scientists are very clear that people in the global north, we do need to cut back on our meat consumption if the world is going to meet its climate goals. And then in terms of health, because we always look at things through different lenses, so you've got your environmental lens, but in terms of the health lens, the Lancet, a medical journal you might be aware of, suggests far less red meat for people who eat a lot of it, such as Americans, Canadians, UK citizens, but not necessarily the world's poor. People in North America eat more than 6 times the recommended amount of red meat, while countries in South Asia eat half of what's recommended. So, yeah, as I said, it comes back to what we discussed: equity, ecological balance. And then you've got the issues around welfare of billions of animals we farm, and many of these animals live lives ranging from poor to abysmal, really different variations there. So yeah, is it ethical to farm animals in factory conditions for meat? We don't need to eat. Yeah, very want to think about there. So can anybody remember which greenhouse gas livestock like cattle and sheep produce? Is there? Yeah, so good job. Cows and sheep are ruminants and digest their food via enteric fermentation. I think many of us know that. So it's a very clever way to digest fibrous foods like grass using bacteria in their stomachs, but it also means that they burp an awful lot of methane. So yeah, about 1.4 billion cattle in the world, and they, along with other grazers, contribute about 40% of those global emissions, according to National Geographic. So that's our source for that one. Okay, and in contrast, plant-based foods do have a much lighter footprint, but they also contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. And they certainly contribute to many other wider environmental problems, such as clearing habitats, including forests, to create space to grow foods like soy or palm oil is also another issue as well for climate and biodiversity loss. In terms of emissions, though, the biggest problem arable farming faces is the overuse of industrial fertilizers. So can anybody remember which greenhouse gas fertilizers produce? The answer is nitrous oxide. Industrial fertilizers produce nitrous oxide. 67% of nitrous oxide comes from agriculture. But with better farming techniques, we can reduce many of these emissions, whilst also increasing biodiversity and reducing some of the other key impacts agriculture has. And we will look at that next. Okay. Yeah, so together, the production of nitrous oxide and methane by agricultural practices are thought to have roughly the same impact on climate change as the transport sector, and that's a source from WRI. If you're not familiar with WRI, they're a brilliant think tank with offices in Washington, D.C. and in China. So it's the World Resource Institute, especially their work around sustainable diets and how to increase the sales of plant-based foods is really interesting, because they look at behavior change, behavior science, and nudging and defaults as a tool to get people to at least increase their plant-based food consumption. And I shared that document with you, Rebecca. So it'd be interesting if you've had a look at that to hear your thoughts on it as well.